Terrorists, pedophiles and gang lords who use video games to send encrypted messages will be the target of new crime-fighting laws.
In short, this is Australia's version of the FBI-Apple encryption dispute. The holy grail they want is to have decryption tools for every single platform so they can monitor everything that we do. Now, at the moment, they don't have it. And in this dispute, Apple opposed them. You can read it, it's on Wikipedia. Apple opposition to the order because they were looking after their brand and their customers. Reaction, support for Apple, support for FBI, calls for compromise. Anyway, April 13th, this Feinstein, she, with this other guy, Richard Burr, they've got proposed legislation, but it's only proposed. So it hasn't been resolved over there yet, but this is what they're doing in Australia. So let's get into it. This story ran over a couple of news segments this morning, but I'll just go to the two comments that this minister makes that are real indicators that it is Australia's version of this encryption dispute.
That legislation, which was focused on telecommunications companies, is no longer fit for purpose because we communicate in so many different ways, including gaming apps, which you just talked about there, but much broader as well via Facebook and Google and you name it.
So there is confirming this is not just about the gaming platforms, it is the big ones, Facebook, etc.
So we need legislation that ensures that criminals have no place to hide. Child sex offenders, terrorists, drug smugglers, drug dealers, more generally, criminals more generally.
They mentioned a few big ticket off items like terrorism and pedos. He actually made an omission at the end. It's general criminals, in other words, everyone.
There have been some privacy concerns raised in the past. You just touched on there that with these video games, you're specifically going to be looking at the messages involved here. Does it include, though, encrypted messages?
Oh, do you notice how nervous Lara got as she got to the actual most important part? Because, look, she's read the script over and over. They've drilled into her, this is really important, don't stuff this up. And she got really nervous right at the most important part where she got encryption. She just sort of stuffed it up a little bit there. She better get better. If she's going to be staying on as fooling us all, she needs to get better at doing this. She almost gave it up.
There are ways and means of dealing with encrypted data if that's what we get.
Okay, now he's becoming very vague there. There are ways and means for us to deal with encrypted data. But he doesn't go into any specifics because he doesn't want to divulge what this is actually all about.
When we intercept these communications, the crucial point from a privacy point of view is that none of this can happen without a warrant.
So there's the two most important parts that give an indication as to what this is actually about. The ways and means of dealing with encrypted data and warrants and how they're going to apply warrants to that process. Now, this is alluded to by this woman in an earlier segment of the same story, so we'll just watch her.
Or, Sarah, how exactly will this work?
Good morning, Laura. Well, this is all about giving police and our security services access to more information that they haven't previously been able to access. So as you mentioned, those encrypted messages, the way that will work is if police get a warrant for your phone or your device, for example, when you send that message, it is encrypted. As that person receives it, it is decrypted and they're able to read that. What this would mean is that our police would be able to read those messages at the same time as the person receiving it.
Then when they can conduct surveillance on someone in real time, is that they're not waiting on the information and then decrypting it. They're decrypting it in real time, in which case they must have the decryption tool, which would have to have been provided by Facebook or Google or even the games manufacturer and software writers for their messaging systems. So that is what they're going to have, and that is what they'd want. But what if they only have an encryption tool, but not a decryption tool? Well, what can they do then?
Now, they say that tech giants and telcos would be forced to hand over this information. First of all, they would ask for it voluntarily, ask them for a hand. If they refuse, they would be told it was a compulsory request and there could be fines of up to $10 million. And the third step is if they don't know how to assist police, that they have to work hard to try and find a way to assist police. Now,
so there you have it. If they don't have a decryption tool, the government can force them to create one or not let them create any more encryption until they have a corresponding decryption tool, which will then be given to the government. Now, so how do warrants apply to that situation where they want the decryption tool? Okay, so you've got the accused and the accomplice, so they're swapping information on, say, Facebook platform, and you've got ASIO and AFP over there. So ASIO and AFP get the decryption tool, issue a warrant number 1, and from Facebook get the decryption tool. They've now got it. Now, I'm not sure about Facebook, but certainly for games, they're not going to have different encryption codes for different messaging systems. They're going to have the one encryption code way to do it. So they only need one decryption tool. And I would say that would apply to Facebook, and they would have their own way, they have their own encryption. So you only need the one decryption tool. I could be technically wrong on that. They may have multiple, but I would think for business purposes and efficiency, they would just have the one encryption because that's all they would really need. So they've now got the decryption tool. They can then use that decryption tool to monitor them in real time. They apply the decryption tool and get their information back over to ASIO and AFP. So that's warrant number 1. Now, warrant number 2. Oh, look over here. They've already got the decryption tool. Do they even need warrant number 2? Well, if they need to go to court, they may go to the trouble of getting a warrant number 2, but they don't need to because they already have the decryption tool. See? So when that minister said that there are ways and means, well, and using warrants, remember he said it was a time-honoured practice in Australia? Yeah, well, that's where you're after individual pieces of information or surveillance for a certain time, not for something that can then allow perpetual surveillance. So could you imagine what they can do once they get the decryption tool for each of the platforms? What do you think they're going to, oh no, we're not using it, boys, not until we get a warrant. Let's see if we can get a warrant first. Really? Do they have to give the decryption tool back? Well, it's going to be a bunch of software. They can just, make a copy and keep it themselves. So do you think, and look, this is where they're going to be monitoring us, the public. Look, I know they mentioned paedophiles and gang lords and terrorists, and once they get this decryption tool, and that's for this accused and that accomplice. Well, what about all the other users on Facebook? Well, they've got the decryption tool now to look at everybody. So when this idiot's trying to put us at ease that, look, we need a warrant and they can keep their decryption, they can keep their encryption. Well, they want them to keep the encryption because they're the only ones with a decryption tool, which is what they're going to get. So I think I've got it right. I think I've explained it correctly. Now, I don't know if this legislation's got through Parliament yet, because I dare say Facebook and a few of the platforms, they might, have a few objections and might make some submissions because they're affected. So, but they're talking like it's already over the line. I have to check the legislation register and see if it's gone through. Because let's not forget, a couple of years ago, the FBI, look, they already could decrypt it, but they couldn't admit that they could decrypt it. So they tried to get Facebook to make a decryption tool, Apple to make a decryption tool, and they wouldn't do it. And they reached an impasse, and FBI had someone's phone, but they managed to get it anyway. But they wanted a decryption tool to legitimize all of the decrypting that they were already doing, which is probably what they're already doing here, by the way. And but even if they didn't have it, once we've got it, there are police treaties in regards to police where they can swap information legally. And therefore, once Australia gets it, and what the Americans, MI5 want it, they're just going to give it out to everyone else. So that's why probably platforms like Facebook, Apple, and particularly Apple anyway, they don't want to give out they don't want to make decryption tools. So again, they could be pushing shit uphill, trying to get those big platforms to comply.
Of course, the minister tells us that this is not about invading our privacy. This is all about catching criminals.
Is that what the minister said? Oh, I had no idea. It's only about catching criminals. Oh, well, look, my audience, you already know about all this sort of stuff. Anyone new, hopefully you'll figure it out pretty quick. But yeah, it's about a big spy, just expanding the spy network on all of us, but also so they can then get to us in court. All right, that's it.